Everyone is going to call this a fairy tale, but that is actually the wrong word for what happened. The real story is far more interesting than the version that will be reduced to a few seconds of highlights from Manila to Melbourne. The headline you will see everywhere will say unseeded underdog world number 28 defeats a four-time Grand Slam champion 6-4, 6-2 to reach her first-to-level final. It is simple, emotional, and easy to share. But it misses the real reason this moment mattered. Because if you look closely at what happened on that hard court in Washington, this was not a Cinderella story. This was a match where champion's serve started falling apart in real time and one fearless player refused to let the opportunity disappear. This was Alex Eala defeating Naomi Osaka to reach the final of the Mubadala City DC Open. It was their first ever tour meeting, decided in just over an hour on a Sunday morning in Manila and a Sunday afternoon in Washington, D.C. But before looking at how Eala beat a former world number one, you have to understand the road she had already survived to get there. This was not a fresh, comfortable run through the draw. Every match had tested her. She began the tournament by avenging a previous defeat against Zheng Qinwen, fighting back after losing the first set to win 4-6, 6-4, 6-1. It was a victory that evened their rivalry after Zheng had won their exhausting 3-hour battle at the 2023 Asian Games. Then came defending champion Leylah Fernandez, and that match looked like it might end. She fell behind quickly, losing 5 straight games and finding herself down 5-1 in the second set. For most players, that is where the story ends. But Eala refused to collapse. She fought back, won 5 consecutive games, forced a tiebreak, and took control when the pressure was at its highest. Then came the quarterfinal, where she produced one of the most impressive performances of the tournament. Eala defeated Aryna Sabalenka 6-3, 6-4, repeating the exact scoreline from their meeting in Berlin just 1 month earlier. Same opponent, same challenge, same result. And that is why calling this a fairy tale does not tell the full story. Fairy tales happen by surprise. What Alex Eala is building is happening through resilience, preparation, and the ability to deliver when the biggest moments arrive. That is not luck. That is the experience of someone who has already been in those pressure moments and knows how to finish the job. By the time Alex Eala stepped onto the court against Naomi Osaka, Osaka, meanwhile, arrived through a much smoother path on paper. She received a first-round bye, then advanced after Ashlyn Kruger retired with an ankle injury while trailing 6-3, 3-1. But the scorelines alone do not tell the full story. In the quarterfinal, Osaka was pushed to a deciding set by unranked Italian Elisabetta Cocchiaretto. She dropped the opening set 4-6 before eventually finding her rhythm and turning the match around. That created 2 completely different journeys into the semifinal. Eala arrived battle-tested, carrying the confidence of surviving difficult situations. Osaka arrived with fewer matches but still searching for consistency. One player had physical battles behind her, while the other had mental battles to overcome. And the quarterfinal against Kruger actually revealed something important about Osaka's game heading into the Eala match. She landed only 47% of her first serves, a surprisingly low number for a player with her serving reputation. She won just over half of those first serve points. What saved her was the second serve, where she dominated by winning 18 of 25 points, a 72% success rate that covered up the struggles with her first delivery. But against an opponent who understands how to attack that weakness, relying on second serve brilliance is not a sustainable strategy. It is a temporary solution, not a long-term answer. Eventually, someone finds the opening. And that is exactly what Eala did. The first set became the blueprint for the entire match. Both players held their early service games, trading comfortable holds and waiting for the first opening. Then at 4-4, Eala made her move. She broke Osaka's serve. And from that point forward, the momentum began shifting. It was not about overpowering Osaka with pure aggression. It was about precision, patience, and smart returning. Eala was not trying to blast every ball past a former world number one. Instead, she targeted the second serve, stepped inside the baseline, and attacked the ball early. She took away Osaka's recovery time after the serve and forced her to play under constant pressure. The idea sounds simple, but executing it against a 4-time Grand Slam champion is anything but simple. Eala managed to do it when the pressure was at its highest. Serving for the first set at 5-4, she raced ahead to 40-0. But Osaka showed the champion's mentality, saving 3 consecutive set points and forcing the game to deuce. This was the moment where many unseeded players start to hesitate. The pressure changes, the crowd becomes louder, doubts begin to appear. But Eala had already shown throughout the tournament that these are exactly the moments where she does not disappear. These are the moments where she finds another level. When your first serve percentage starts dropping, the pressure changes everything. Players begin guiding the ball instead of swinging freely. They start searching for safety instead of trusting their shots. A flat, aggressive backhand down the line that forced the issue and finished the game with a winner. The first set was Osaka's toss had even reached its highest point. That was not a simple reaction. That was anticipation built from reading the same patterns over and over during the previous return games. Great returners do not just respond to what is happening. Elite returners begin moving because they already understand what is likely coming. That is why in the 8th game of the first set, Eala was no longer reacting to Osaka's serve. She was predicting it. And that tiny difference between reacting and anticipating is where breakpoints are created. The second set should have been the moment where Osaka regrouped. A player with 4 Grand Slam titles and former world #1 experience should be able to reset, clean up the serve, and force an opponent to earn every single point. But that is not what happened. Instead, the second set revealed the real reason behind the scoreline. Osaka opened her first service game with a double fault. She responded with an ace. Then came another back-and-forth battle at 30-30, showing the inconsistency that was beginning to appear in her service rhythm. The toss was no longer repeating the same way. The timing was slipping. The confidence behind the delivery was fading. Eala recognized it immediately and kept attacking the exact area that had worked in the opening set. She stepped inside the baseline against the second serve and refused to give Osaka any breathing room. The pressure never disappeared. She broke for a 3-2 lead, then broke again for 5-2. By the time she served for the match, Osaka had already saved 1 match point at 40-30. But the damage had been done. The double faults were no longer isolated mistakes. They had become a pattern. This was not simply a case of a champion being out-hit from every area of the court. This was a serve motion slowly breaking down under relentless pressure, game after game, until there was no longer enough stability to survive. And that is the part that changes the entire way we should look at this match. Because this was not just an underdog defeating a superstar. The deeper story is how Eala identified a weakness, attacked it without hesitation, and turned a former world #1's greatest weapon into the pressure point that decided the match. Osaka explained it herself immediately after the match. In her own words, she described it as more of a mental battle than a pure tennis battle. She admitted that she did not feel like she played her best and that the match became about fighting through every single point rather than finding a consistent rhythm. That was not just a casual comment. It was a 4-time Grand Slam champion explaining that the deciding factor was not simply the quality of Eala's shots. It was the mental pressure created between every point, and Eala never gave her enough space to reset. But it is important to be careful with that interpretation. This is not a story about Osaka being weak mentally, and that is not what she was saying. What she described is something every elite athlete understands. There is a difference between playing a match and surviving one. You can survive a set. You can survive a difficult match. But against an opponent who keeps applying pressure, you cannot build an entire tournament run by constantly needing your second serve to rescue you. The match against Kruger worked because Kruger was dealing with an injury issue. The quarterfinal against Coxiretto worked because Osaka managed to find a way before her opponent could fully capitalize. But Eala was different. She never backed away. She never gave Osaka the opportunity to escape. That is the difference between an opponent who allows you to survive and an opponent who forces you to pay for every moment when you are not completely locked in. Tactically, that is what made the scoreline so significant. A player of Osaka's level does not lose 6-4, 6-2 simply because her ground strokes suddenly disappear. She loses that way when the opponent across the net refuses to allow one bad service game to remain just one bad service game. Eala turned those moments into a pattern, and patterns grow stronger over time. Every time Osaka double-faulted, Eala moved her return position slightly closer. Every step forward reduced the reaction time on the next second serve. Every aggressive return created another question in Osaka's mind. That is not luck. That is controlled pressure repeated again and again until the difference between "I'm having a difficult moment and I cannot find my game" disappears completely. But this story cannot only be about what went wrong for Osaka, because that would ignore the most impressive part of what Eala accomplished. Look back at her entire week in Washington. The comeback against Fernandez. The revenge victory over Zheng Qinwen. The repeat performance against Sabalenka after Berlin. A pattern starts to appear. Eala is not simply a player who wins when everything is going perfectly. Those players look incredible when they have momentum, but struggle when the match turns against them. Eala has shown something much more valuable. Throughout this tournament, she has repeatedly been tested, often losing control in moments where young players usually panic, and instead of fading, she has responded by raising her level. That is not just talent. That is a skill built through experience, preparation, and pressure situations. Plenty of 21-year-old players can hit a beautiful backhand. Far fewer can stay composed when everything is on the line and find a way to win. Far fewer players can. The ability to reset instantly is one of the biggest differences between talented players and players who are ready for the biggest moments. And there is another factor that cannot be ignored heading into the final: the physical challenge. Eala has now played 4 matches in 6 days, and 3 of those matches demanded something extra from her. These were not simple, comfortable victories. They required comebacks, long rallies, emotional control, and the ability to keep competing when fatigue started to build. Whoever comes through the Pegula vs Schneider semifinal will also carry their own physical and mental workload into the championship match. At this stage of a WTA 500 tournament, finals are rarely decided only by strategy. They are decided by small details: whose legs remain stronger, whose movement stays sharper, and whose serve motion holds together when the match reaches the 3rd hour. And based on what Eala has shown throughout this week, especially the way she finished against Fernandez and Osaka, there is a strong argument that her conditioning and mental endurance could become one of her biggest advantages. She has not been surviving late in matches. She has been getting stronger. She has closed matches instead of allowing opponents back into them. That is the real tactical question heading into the title match. It is no longer about whether Eala can compete with a bigger name. She has already answered that question by defeating a former world number 1 on a major stage. The question now is whether her next opponent can handle the pressure she creates, whether they can protect their second serve, maintain their composure, and keep their legs fresh when the match enters its most demanding moments. Because after watching what Eala has done across these 2 sets and throughout this entire Washington run, the bigger question is not whether she belongs in the final. The question is whether anyone left in the draw can stop the level of tennis she has built.